The New South Wales Government is radically overhauling rural and regional education in a bid to lift results in Aboriginal and other disadvantaged communities. In the first stage, 15 schools will become community hubs, with health, education, parenting support and anti-gambling measures all coordinated from within the school grounds. New super principals will be recruited on salaries of $200,000 a year, with bonuses of up to $50,000. New South Wales Premier Barry O'Farrell says he's acted out of sheer frustration with poor academic results among Indigenous students, which he says make him ashamed to be an Australian citizen. Other states are watching, and Premier O'Farrell wants federal government backing. This exclusive report from Late Line's Suzanne Smith.
These children at Walgett in far western New South Wales are about to be part of a bold new experiment known as Connected Communities. In stage one of the plan, 15 schools in regional and rural areas will be transformed. Every part of a school's operation will be deemed open to change, and the local community will drive the changes. Schools included in the plan include Walgett, Toomala, Wilcannia Central School, Boggabilla Central School, as well as 11 other schools from across the state.
Leadership is the key. So what we've really focused on is making sure that we put things in place to make sure we get the best leaders possible. Now, the principals of these schools are going to be the highest paid public school principals in New South Wales. They'll be on 5-year performance contracts. There'll be bonuses for achieving those performance outcomes that the community wants.
These new executive principals will be paid in the vicinity of $200,000 a year and will be given a $50,000 bonus if they meet targets within 5 years. They'll in fact be super principals, coordinating health, law and order, psychological and parenting services on the school campuses.
With respect to healthcare for children, particularly school-aged children and early childhood, we certainly do want to have a greater coordination between the schools and the healthcare providers. Now, I'm aware of a student in one of these communities, a 7-year-old, that's been waiting for more than 18 months to have an operation on his hearing. Now, that's impacting on his education. They're the kind of roadblocks that we need to get out of the way.
On the banks of the river. The executive principals will also be able to extend the hours of the school day and have a greater say over the employment of teachers. And in consultation with the local community, they may provide homework centres out of school hours and also help parents improve their literacy and numeracy. The introduction of Indigenous languages is a key part of this policy, as is preschool education. If a community doesn't have a functioning preschool, the New South Wales Government says it's committed to building one on the existing campus. This whole-of-government approach to school communities will also include problem gambling.
The rest of the New South Wales Government is 100% committed to supporting this reform and supporting particularly Aboriginal communities. We can't find a solution to some of these intractable problems just in education. It's got to be in health, it's got to be in community services, it has to be in law and order. It has to be in the way we manage gambling and alcohol and how we control some of those things. But government can't thrust these solutions onto communities.
Are you going to have to bang heads together in the bureaucracy?
We're going to have to tackle two of the hardest things you ever do, and that's generational change, and that's we're trying to achieve here better outcomes that may take a generation to achieve within the Aboriginal community. But even harder than that at times is the cultural change within the bureaucracy, where they've operated as silos, where with the best will in the world, even when they share the same goals, they're not being prepared to cooperate. So I intend, along with the ministers who sit around the cabinet table, to ensure that across the public service, to the extent possible, we have seamless cooperation to achieve these outcomes, which may well be 15 different models across 15 different schools.
At the heart of this policy shift is a recognition that there has been little improvement in Indigenous educational outcomes in the last 10 years. This document contains the data for every Indigenous student in New South Wales over the past decade.
Well, as a citizen, I'm ashamed. As Premier, I'm determined to try and do something about it, and no one pretends it's going to be easy. But when you think about that only a third of the kids who start in Year 7 will complete Year 12, that only half of Aboriginal children and young adults aged between 15 and 24 will be engaged in full-time study or training. It's an appalling outcome.
I think it's very sad and, in fact, I think a national embarrassment to see that over 10 years nothing much has changed.
In international comparisons, New South Wales Indigenous students are ranked slightly above Mexico for high school results. Premier O'Farrell says the federal government should support this initiative.
Aboriginal problems aren't just about Northern Australia, they are about large states like New South Wales as well, and so we look to the federal government to support this initiative.
Premier O'Farrell has also expressed frustration at the lack of action on the Gonski report into public education.
The Gonski report would help because it would see additional funding flow, in this instance, to public schools, which would help address these issues. My concern, of course, is that Gonski seems to be well and truly parked. So in the meantime, we'll get on using our own resources, hopefully with the support of the federal government, to try and make this connected communities work.
Would you consider New South Wales going alone with Gonski with the federal government?
Well, look, Minister Pickerley is a supporter of the Gonski report. I'm a supporter of the Gonski report. It can't be implemented unless all governments agree. In the meantime, the New South Wales Government will continue to manage public education in this state so that everyone, Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal Australians, get the best possible start to their lives.
Premier O'Farrell says he continues to support the Gonski reforms despite the views of the federal Liberal leadership.
Well, you know, there are always differences between federal and state parties at both levels, and so they're entitled to their views, we're entitled to our views. In the meantime, until there's a change of federal government, we'll keep pushing what we think's best for our states.
Learning in the outback is out of sight.
This school, Burke Primary in Western New South Wales, has already volunteered to become part of the plan. The New South Wales Teachers Federation also supports the move, as long as funding is maintained in the long term. The next stage of the policy will look at urban schools. Aids in Western Sydney is likely to be one of the first city centres to take part.
When we email every day, there's nothing like TV.
Suzanne Smith, Lateline.